meeting to order. Thank you all for coming tonight. We'll start with the Pledge of Allegiance. The flag is up. Everybody rise. I pledge
allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
All right, the first item on the agenda is the approval of the minutes for the regular meeting from November 27, 2018.
Motion to approve the November 27, 2018 regular meeting minutes.
Is there a second?
Second.
All in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Motion carries. Next is the executive session meeting from November 27, 2018.
Motion to approve the November 27, 2018 executive session meeting minutes.
Is there a second?
Second.
All in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
You vote for the motion carrying. I don't have anything new to add for the chairman's report, so we'll skip past that. Next is the financial report. Brian, do you have anything to say that isn't budget related?
Sure. I mean, I can walk you through a little bit. If you go to the fourth page of your package, you'll see about 14 pages, or seven pages of financials. Overall, we're in the positive for a year, a little bit. $120,000 in change in our debt service account, $179,000 in change in our operating account, a little bit in our escrow account, some accounts receivable, but we're trying to figure out exactly how those are generated. And that's really where we're at. So I guess if you go back go back 2 pages from that, our net income for the 11 months that ended November 30th is we're up $229,000 in change. So a little bit more money to play.
Great.
I have one question, maybe this is for Catherine. What is the $3,000 computer equipment we buy? Something?
No, it was computer equipment, it was the camera.
Oh, is that what the camera? Okay, that's fine.
We haven't bought that camera yet.
You got reimbursed.
Yeah, that's $500.
All right, so how did we get $1,000?
Sorry,
The balance sheet shows that we have property. This is an asset. It's under assets. Property and equipment. It says computer equipment, $3,000. Maybe, I mean, it's not a big deal. It's a small amount, but maybe if you could research it, Brian, you could have the CDDA research.
Did we actually allocate for mixing boards so we could have, and we just have to spend it?
This is a balance sheet. Balance sheet shows things that have actually been purchased. It's not a budgetary item.
We didn't pay for this stuff, did we?
No, I don't think so. The city did that.
What I thought.
So I'm just curious where that came from.
All right. Thank you. Anything else?
Nope, that's all I have.
Next is the branding committee.
So yeah, y'all asked. We voted to start a committee. I've got about 4 or 5 people that have expressed interest on being on that committee, but we have not had an actual called meeting because I realized we really need to have someone at that meeting that could sort of guide us as we had the conversation, so we're just not randomly talking about it. And I met up with a gentleman that's here today that wants to give us a little presentation, Greg Abel from Tailfin. So Greg is in the back there. If you want to look up, he's going to just give us a short little presentation on what this company does. While he's setting up, they specifically help with organizations like us, municipalities, and whatnot. So, I figured once. I figured once we got past the holidays, then if y'all are okay, I'll continue to move forward with the branding committee and actually have a call meeting and get Greg to, unless you want to go a different route, get Greg to sort of help us as we go through that process.
That sounds fantastic.
So I'm not sure everyone can see. Will we have both? Yeah. I won't mess with that. No problem. So I'm Greg Abel. I'm the founder of Tailfin Marketing. We're down in Virginia, Iowa, so we're local-ish. I'm actually more of a local here. I grew up just across the highway off Shenandoah. I used to live in Hilton Hills, and I have a plane parked at PDK. So I know the area pretty well. We are a brand and marketing company. We've been in business now for just about 20 years, and one of our key verticals is tourism and entertainment. So we help a lot of destinations, whether those are cities proper or whether they are parts of cities or even attractions within, position and brand themselves so that we can drive some extra tourism revenue. So what Van and I had been talking about, he introduced me to the idea that has been, it sounds like germinating and growing a little bit here. I've called it, for the purposes of today, Chambly Quarter. But the idea is, how are we talking about maybe redefining some of the classic old Chambly area and finding a way to really wrap a brand around it. So what I have today is, and I'll go through this pretty quick, I know you guys have a pretty full agenda, but it was a basic approach of how we would go about doing this with an organization like yours. So we'll do a quick overview, walk through the approach, do a little bit of Q&A, and then show some work that we've done for other areas. So what we've heard, this is always interesting when I bounce this back, but what we've heard is that we are looking as a city to think about, and as real heartfelt constituents in that city, find a way to create a new center within Old Chambly. And I think that one of the ways that we've talked about it is, can we create something that will have some gravity and attraction beyond Scoop down Peachtree Industrial? And I think that one of the things that we've thought about was, how do we create a unifying spirit, maybe make this a little bit more of a walkable community, things that will be very connective and unifying, especially as our demographic continues to grow and change. Some steps already in motion with your dev authority, but since we don't have a brand name or even really a very well-defined geographical what is it, we thought that we could really step in and give you a hand. So one of the trends that we always like to look at, we like to look at some insights. One of them is this idea of this metamorphosis of the micropolis rather than the megalopolis or the metropolis. And it's kind of interesting because you guys are right on track. I mean, the truth is, communities are looking to create these things, whether organically or even sometimes forcibly, but to get the idea of how do we remedy some of this idea of suburban flight, the death of Main Street, the sort of big boxing of communities. And one of the things that has really happened that we've seen, along with buy local and eat local movements, is this idea of building a center of gravity, bustling civic center of gravity. You'll hear me say that again and again. You've seen it already in other communities in the city, in the metro area at large. Certainly what Alpharetta is continuing to do, what Roswell is continuing to do, what Sandy Springs is continuing to do. Those are things that are in a way catching up with the more organic existence of places like Marietta Square. So I think you guys are right on the right direction. It's just, where do you go from here? How do you put it together? So for us, from marketing objectives would be, A, to define the geography. This isn't a natural square. So what is it? There needs to be, within a visitor's mindset, what am I going to arrive to? What am I going to expect? We need to think of a brand name. It doesn't compete. This is not something that should overshadow the city of Chambly. And there's been, it's funny, when I first bought my home here, it was 94, and it has been so transformative over the last 25 years, however long that is. 94 seems like it was yesterday. That we want to make sure that we are not competing, but rather complementing. So how can we make this a part of the larger city? Maybe it's part. And again, that term I keep using, center of gravity. We want to make sure that we're attracting visitors, and that should be just locally and geographically. What's interesting to me is that even within these sort of micropolises that have sprouted up, there are people who still haven't explored the different corners or the different parts. They come and go from their little corner and they never see the rest of it. This is an opportunity to kind of bring those people together, embrace some of the historic flavor, and really stay on top of trend. So how do we get there? Our brand approach, we really look at it in 3 major phases. So immersion, strategy, and creative foundations. Immersion is a lot of what it sounds like. It's where we start looking around. And I think that it's a little bit of digging into the history here to understand truly what we're working with, but beyond that, looking at what are trends, both locally, nationally, and regionally, who's done it well, and really understanding there's some best in class we can follow. Also, we want to do a lot of internal stakeholder perceptual measures to understand what's everyone's opinion? What does everyone think they want? What does everyone think the community needs? And we might even look at going one step beyond and looking at neighboring market areas. So what would something in Dunwoody or Tucker or Brookhaven feel and think about having this new center? Is it something they'd be excited about? And even more so, what does somebody in Noonan or Dalton or beyond think about? From there, we'll take all those sort of data points and create a brand strategy. Within that, we usually do user personas so we can identify what our key targets are, what they want and need, how we can deliver on that uniquely and differently than other areas. Because certainly, we're going to have some competition. Last but not least, we take that strategy and we put it into stuff that, frankly, the things that my mom thinks I do for a living. Here's a cool name, here's a neat logo, here's a campaign, all those things that sort of where the rubber hits the road, where we come out from behind the curtain and make our best play. So this presentation, which I'll share in advance so you can share with the group, but it goes into really a lot more detail for each one of these things. But really, it's not a super difficult process, it's just a methodical process. Right now, we're looking for phase 1, around 6 to 8 weeks. All of this could accelerate or slow depending on stakeholder participation and, frankly, enthusiasm. If we have people that are hot to trot, we can make it happen a lot quicker. Phase 2, when we start to get into that strategy, this is a lot of things that we do with those data points, but we do it a little bit behind the curtain in an iterative process with whatever committee we have that wants to really get their hands dirty and be a part of this each step of the way. You go from personas to a need summary, to need benefit language, and then finally a position and manifesto that really articulates what we are, why we matter, why we're here, and who we serve. That, we're looking probably about 4 weeks, so if you're keeping score at home, 10 to 12 weeks so far. Then phase 3, for me this is really 2 big parts, and that's naming. So what are we going to call it? Because you have to think about this in a way that people are going to use this very casually, sometimes they even nickname it, or are they going to use it very literally? Either way, we have to make sure that we vet that out and that it has some good feeling to it. There's a lot of places I think we can mine. Certainly, there's some common geographical space definitions, square, common, green, strip, all those kinds of things. I think that there could be some really cool historical context. Atlantic Station is kind of a halfway decent example of using that. We're actually doing right now the part of the rebrand for the new Colony Square, and it's amazing the history that you can turn up when you start digging a little deeper. It's funny, some of the best history is only like 50 years old, but it's really interesting stuff. So I think there's a lot of places we can mine for there. And then visual ID. This is one of the things that we'll definitely want to make sure that we're balancing with the city of Chamblee, so there's a nice complement, but still has some unique and flexible degrees of variance. That adds another 4 to 6 weeks. And then we have what I call phase X. And honestly, at this point, you guys will have a definition, a brand, a way to articulate what you are that you can do with whatever you need. If you like, we can certainly help. We do a lot of this too, which is the outreach. And that's, again, taking a look at what channels we might consider, what audiences we might consider, understanding what kind of budgets we might have from the city, from some of the public-private organizations that might want to fuel some of this awareness. Put together an outreach calendar, start developing assets. And by assets, I mean, is it an ad, is it a banner, is it some social messaging, etc. So I was, again, trying to keep it brief because I know you guys have a full evening. We have, after this, some relevant work that we've done for other places. It's frankly a little bit of eye candy that we can roll through. But I thought I'd give a second or two here for any questions that anyone might have at this point.
So you're going to come on as an advisor, or you're promoting your firm as our branding firm?
I come on as a branding firm. So this is what we do for a living.
What will this cost us?
We haven't scoped that out yet, and I think that there's a lot of variables. Basically, what I wanted to get to today is, here is the process. Is anybody excited about that? And if so, I can pull some numbers based on what we've done for.
Listen, what I was, in my thinking was that, if y'all agree that we need some guidance, we would call a committee meeting in January sometime, have Greg there, we could talk through that sort of stuff, and then I could bring back that information to the board for approval, saying, okay, here's the scope of what, you know, the branding committee feels like we want from an organization like that, and this is what it'll cost.
Okay.
The one thing I would add to it is we were talking about some of this, you know, the community surveys and getting information about what people think about Chamblee. And, you know, a lot of that is that we just did that as a part of the city center project within the last 6 months. I think the city has done similar things for the city of Chamblee, you know, whether it's the comprehensive plan or whether it's the economic development plan, or you're probably doing some of it with the arts plan that's going on right now.
Yeah.
And so I would just ask to make sure that we don't have to reinvent the wheel every time we need to buy one. We can pull some of that stuff in as well.
We'd love to mine from that, and a lot of times what that'll do is two things. It'll either narrow or focus as to what we, if there's some questions that are unanswered. Sometimes it just informs you all the way. Sometimes it may narrow, but one thing we want to make sure that we don't do is get into research fatigue, where we're asking the same people again and again and again, because the answers will inevitably trend in a very negative way. So,
Well, and I think especially that we've done stuff like we're in the process of.
okay.
So I think that information is going to be fresh and new, and it's going to speak to exactly what you're talking about as well.
Fantastic. That's great.
Plus, we have the History Center's work, which is right there for your mining.
Absolutely.
If you will.
Yeah.
So, yeah, I think we're probably a few steps ahead of just starting.
That's fantastic.
So,
Yeah, we've had instances where we've walked in and somebody has literally
Yeah.
given me a dolly with 6 banker boxes and says, here's data. Which sometimes is great, sometimes it's a little daunting.
I know we may be ahead of city council on some of this. Has council discussed doing, you know, a signage, you know,
For the downtown? No.
No, for the city.
yes.
And I just want to make sure we dovetail with that as well.
Absolutely.
I would think, yeah, that when the committee meets, we need to discuss that, and maybe even, you know, before we get into actual, you know, stuff, make sure that, just like you said, get the data from our studies and the studies the city's done, and also anything that would sort of work hand in glove with what the city wants to do with the rest of the city.
I think arguably it almost needs to be a city initiative, and this would be an outshoot of the branding, you know, campaign or initiative or whatever you want to call it in the city. Otherwise, you could get into something where we've got these kind of very disjointed efforts.
Well, I think that they certainly need to go together. Absolutely, we can't discount what the city has done.
Right.
And I think we can't all of a sudden go, oh, let's go in this direction when we've been going in this direction. So
Yeah,
I
there's no
think
doubt
that has to be
about
absolutely considered. I don't think that the city's gone through this too, as far as just city branding, you know, and we actually.
I think though that there's a real defined difference between city branding and what we're trying to create with our downtown. You know, the development authorities of other downtowns that have created their downtown have gone through the effort. I mean, Decatur didn't just say, okay, well, we created Decatur Square, and that was it.
Yeah.
They actually went through a marketing and branding.
But I would also hope that what the DDA does is compatible and aligned with the overall city.
Well, we're going to have to go to the city for implementation.
I think Van's in fact arguing it does not have to be.
No, I don't think.
No, that's not at all what I'm arguing. I'm saying it needs to be compatible, and which is why when the committee, I mean, the reason we set up this branding committee was so that we could say, all right, this is what we would like to see our downtown from a branding and marketing space. When we collect that, then we go to the city council and say, here's what we put together. This is what we feel as development authority for downtown, that you've tasked us with creating this downtown. Here's what we, from a branding perspective, they can say, hey, no, we don't like it, we want to go a different direction. That's up to them, but we need to be able to present
But
that.
I'm concerned that they can't be out
One of the
front.
things that you're talking about, let's talk about wayfinding signs. Wayfinding signs are something that we, as a county.
That's low-hanging fruit.
It's a low-hanging fruit, okay, so you would come to council and say wayfinding signs, you would also look at the wayfinding signs that we do already have, the monuments that we have in Chamblee, and say, how can we incorporate that design into the wayfinding design?
Sure.
So we don't undo what has already been done, but that we focus what we're doing on the downtown. I mean, I think that's.
Yeah, I don't think anyone's saying start over or redo.
Well, to be clear, branding has always been a component of the town center plan. So this is really just something that's always been part of it, we're just now getting around to it. So it was never intended to be something separate from what the city does.
Right.
It definitely has to incorporate what the city wants to do, things like web design, marketing plans, things that are less tangible or something like that.
And as you said, we went through that process, both city council and DDA. We put the little dots on the board and said, this is what we like, what we don't like. That's data, as Greg said, that he would mine and say, okay, this is what you did in your work sessions. Here's how you can take that information and actually create a brand.
Has the city contemplated reevaluating its own branding, or are they happy with what we've got, happy with the graphic sounds? And so it really just needs to work within that framework.
We're relatively happy with it. I think there's a little bit of dissent about the focus on train all the time, but, so we've become trains, planes, and automobiles.
Should we just do big obelisks? What do you think to the city?
What are you trying to say, Rob?
But
Sorry.
the city realizes the need for what we're talking about here, but it doesn't, I mean, we're not going to redo our seal, we're not going to redo our logo, blah, 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 blah.
We have budget to do communications plan, but that doesn't include redoing the logo.
Branding.
It's just not-
No, this is not to redo anything the city has or change that. This is just, as Greg said, I think at the beginning, we want to be a destination. We want people to say, okay, here's a reason why, but you have to have a brand, and something that you can sink your hands
It's
into.
something to excite people to come to the town center, to occupy the office spaces, to occupy the retail, to occupy the apartments. And that's separate from the city's vision and focus. It's not inconsistent with it, but it is different than it. It's more pinpointed.
And I do think that I'm going to say this one more time. We are in the process of developing an arts master plan, and I really do think that it's not synonymous with what you're talking about.
Mm-hmm.
Absolutely, I'm not saying that, but there is a lot of that saying, well, how is Chamblee different than what's around us? And we're going to be developing that with the arts master plan. And that should speak entirely to what you're doing as well.
It should weave
And vice
together
versa. Yeah.
seamlessly. I mean, I think that this should be, if you guys are redefining the crown, this should be one of the jewels in it. Finding a way to make sure that those things.
And as well, we have the Renaissance plan, which I don't want to throw those efforts away either. So,
Well,
but I'd like to see.
Again, we just like you mentioned, you had one city with a cart full of things. I think we probably have a cart full of boxes that he's going to be like, okay, you've got all these.
This is going to be important to coordinate as part of the actual development elements, the branding and design and all that. I think, so the DDA champions the effort, but there's a lot of, moving in stakeholders.
Sure.
Sure.
Yeah, saying we want to be on the branding committee. Yeah, I think he's on the branding committee now.
As far as like implementing this stuff, is that something you guys manage, or you kind of, like with County Square, you turn this stuff over to like a North American, and they have to internally run with all the stuff that you guys have come up with?
So NAP is actually like that. So within that, there's 3 different partnerships. There's the developer, because we're helping with the food and beverages at the center, which by the way is going to be really, really cool. It's a company called Osray, and NAP is the redeveloper of the entire property. There's all 3 of us working. So what we have come up with is, for that instance especially, all the way down to here's what things are going to be named, here's what we're suggesting for overall look and feel, here's what we're suggesting, not necessarily all the way down to architectural detail, but to architectural ideation. So we'll be working hand in glove with those, both their teams as developers. We're not going to be an architectural developer, but we are going to be sort of the brand halo. So we guide that throughout. In some cases, we may have more or less influence. That's a huge project. They're talking about like 30 plus food vendors in that space. So just that alone is kind of a really major undertaking. But so far in that progress, we've been more involved than I even thought we would be. Because typically it's, here's a brand idea, let your architects and designers kind of run with it. I think in this case, because there's so much that has to happen from a financial and frankly physical standpoint in the development and definition of what this is going to be, it's such a big footprint. I think, again, we provide more of the brand message, the brand halo, and hopefully we have people that would be able to use that and riff off of that in terms of the actual implementation of physical space and things like that.
So how does it get pushed out?
So,
you guys come up with a plan, how do you maintain the image? How do you know, when you're talking about social and all these other things go into?
So social we would implement. So anything that's media outreach, and I'm sorry, I might have misunderstood your question. If it's implementation of a physical space, we would handle. If it's implementation of any outreach that would go to consumer business that we're trying to attract, we can handle as much or as little as we need to, depending on what your internal resources are.
Rob, and I think that also goes hand in hand with whatever the city comes up with their communication plan.
Yeah.
You know, if we may say, hey, we just want help from them creating the brand and going through all that data and going through that process, and then we'll turn it over to the communication plan to actually go out, or the communication plan, since it's not done, may say, hey, we don't have that capacity, and we continue to engage their company for that next phase of it. That's my thought on it.
Yeah, it's kind of the root of my question is who owns this once it's
I think,
and how does it?
they call it different things, communication plan. You can create a set of brand standards, some examples of execution and how you execute it. And we're jumping back and forth between branding, strategy, and tactics in the conversation. But from what I'm hearing is we'll create the bigger brand and then it'll sort of roll out. The idea is that you want it to be to some degree kind of consistent and tie into.
Yeah, in our experience is that the stronger the foundation and the brand system, the less you have people that are tending to go rogue and trying to break off. A great example was we helped with the visual ID rollout for Chick-fil-A when we had I don't know when Chick-fil-A made the change from the beak to the beak. One of the reasons they did that is because they have thousands of very enthusiastic operators, so enthusiastic that many times they were creating their own materials. With the rollout of a much more comprehensive, detailed, and frankly just beautiful system, they've been able to bring those people back to the fold. I think the same kind of thing can happen here. We set the groundwork of the right strategy and the right halo brand. I think things will fall out very naturally. In terms of that execution of outreach, a lot of times we start it and then hand it off as a client will staff up. It just really comes down to what's the resource and bandwidth.
So let me ask you about what you're doing with the Colony Square and New Colony Square, and you mentioned architectural. So are you, like when Dunwoody, actually before they incorporated it, they decided that they wanted to have the Williamsburg look in their architecture. Are you talking about doing that for our downtown as well?
Could. I mean, it's not necessarily our wheelhouse, but we've done those types of things. So, for example, we redesigned the visitor center experience at UGA and completely and utterly changed it from top to bottom because they gave us the latitude to do that. I mean, it's one of the things that I think we like to be as complete as we can, knowing that there's going to be some constraints. And I think that, honestly, that sort of the echoes of the larger city of Champlin will guide a lot of that. So I don't think we're going to pick, for example, Williamsburg look. But I think that we would really pay a lot of attention to that and give those architectural cues. By no means are we architects, and we're not really interior designers. But I think from a big picture brand view, because the truth is when we have this new brand, I think people need to be able to, when they see a communication or even hear the name of the place, envision what it's going to be.
Sure.
And I think that's one of the things that, as a former resident and as a lifelong Atlantan, one of the things that afflicts basically every square inch of our larger metropolis is we have an amazing propensity for schizophrenia, where we kind of become somebody different every decade, if not every year. And where you have some long form consistency, you know, places like Decatur Square, places like Little Five Points that have kept a very singular sort of feel. People understand and know what to expect when they go there. I think that's what we would really, it would be a hell of an achievement to have that here, where people can go, I know what that is, I can't wait to go there, and even better, be able to express it and communicate it to the next person down the line. So.
Okay.
And we've also hired, TSW is working on the town center zoning, and part of that will include a pattern book, which will kind of touch on architectural design. That's, of course, specific to the town center, not all of the
Okay.
So I think next steps are.
I'll call a committee meeting in January, get the few people that have participated along with Robert, since he said he might be here. And we'll ask Greg to be there, and then we'll figure out a scope, and then I would say probably, depending on when that meeting is, either our January meeting or our February meeting, we'll bring to you,
Okay.
something to, more concrete, something to actually approve.
Okay. Fantastic. Thank you very much.
You bet, absolutely, thank you.
Thank you, Greg.
Yeah.
No, it's not. No,
I heard a second.
He's gonna get all the emails whether he shows up or not.
All right, next item on the agenda, under old business, we have the fiscal year 2019 budget review. What is our action item on this?
It's
Just
just,
need to adopt it,
yeah,
right? Is there
that
any-
we talked about last time.
We talked about it last month. Do you want to discuss it some more? Because I'll make a
Are there any
motion.
changes?
No, just the additions that we talked about last time, but nothing else.
Motion to approve the adopted 2019 budget.
Second.
All in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Thank you. The next item is the parking study final. Catherine, is this for us to acknowledge receipt of the final version?
And I have printed out copies, and I can email just in case you don't want it. If you like the digital form, which you also have in your board packet. If you don't want it, that's fine. You get my office.
Okay. So to be clear, we're not adopting the parking study. What we're doing is acknowledging that we received the parking study, that we engaged that firm, thank you, Tomas, several months ago. So do we have a motion to acknowledge the acceptance?
Do we need that?
Motion to acknowledge.
Second.
All in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Next item is the SLX report. Catherine, do you want to walk us through what's going on there?
Yeah, so last month, they gave us, take one, pass down, this one. We had asked to go back and submit the report in the format that we had in the original review, which we didn't get this draft until today. Now, the letter that you see with it, that's where they're calculating the final payment for this year, which is around $28,000. The reason why it's not in its final format, the report, the form of the annual report, is because Dan had a couple of questions. I think it's going to be cleared up. I don't think there's going to be any changes. So maybe what the board wants to do is, I don't know. It's up to you guys. It's a draft, so I don't know if you want to.
So just to make sure I understand, what this is saying is 27,927 will come to us as a payment,
Yes.
but the city will still get their 20,000, the schools will get 45,633. Oh wait, there's two things that say schools. I think one of those
One
should
is the
just
county,
count.
one is the school, yeah.
I would think the 74,000 is the school, usually
Yeah.
school is bigger,
Yeah,
right?
yeah.
Which those numbers should correlate to what
What is that?
the taxes would have been had the car dealership stayed as is,
Correct.
which was
Yeah.
what the intent of the deal was to
Yeah.
make sure those taxes continued to flow.
So they dropped their argument that we changed the first year, correct?
Yeah, I haven't heard any response, like I said,
Okay.
with the letter.
And then Dan still has a couple of changes to make, or he wants to take a look at this because we just got it all today.
Yeah, he took a look at it, he was just asking for so they talked about land value versus land cost, so I think it's more of a legalese thing. I think the information there is correct, we had just questioned it about an hour before this meeting. That's why.
Does this need to be approved before December 31st?
There's nothing in there, basically, once the board approves this annual report, then SLX has 10 days to
you all, I don't know if we can authorize it. I think you can authorize me to continue working with Dan.
Dan.
To the point where it can be authorized before the end of the year, or by the 20th tomorrow, so that we can.
Yeah, because you need 10 days, right?
Right, 10 days.
Is that 10 business days or 10 calendar?
It's 10 calendar days.
Okay.
Yeah, definitely.
So motion to approve our chairman to continue working on the final with our lawyer, Dan, to be able to implement before the end of the year.
Second.
All in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Thank you. I'm gonna try to read this tonight.
There's one more email that I'm seeing from the CDDA.
Okay.
While we're talking about SLX, do we need to talk about how do we assure the satisfactory finishes?
So when they asked for the change to the year one, part of the letter we wrote back said, oh, and by the way, we need to schedule an inspection. We have not heard back from them on that. We may need to push to do that in the first couple of weeks of January. And I think John Walker had an inspection firm that he was going to suggest that we hire, because it wouldn't be appropriate for a city inspector to go in there. And maybe one of us accompanies where the inspection firm is to make sure that it meets the
I mean,
requirement.
they're probably not installing finishes yet, but I would imagine that is still way in advance.
No, but we probably don't have to inspect it more than just one time.
But I would imagine that they've got a complete spec package, architects and all sorts of drawings that specify exactly the materials that are being used. So we probably could have the inspection firm evaluate that set to determine if it's aligned with what's in our MOU.
So I don't know what the inspection firm costs. Frankly, this guy likes a little bit of shuffle. I'll probably have to come back to you next month with whatever the cost is going to be, because I simply don't know.
Can we just have a meeting to do that, what you just said, in lieu of
Sure.
hiring a firm? Can we ask them to come in and say, this is our design package? Or-
Yeah, we could absolutely do that.
We can do that.
And not actually hire.
Well,
If we're in a disagreement with them on A, B, or C,
Maybe
they better
that's
not
true.
to iron that out now.
Yeah, that's a great idea.
They've got $1 million worth of finishes installed, and we're fighting at that point.
Yeah.
no, I think that's.
Does that need to be at a formal DDA meeting or just an informal with our chairman and them, or you and them?
To me, it seems like an informal meeting.
Yeah, I would.
I'll do it with you.
I was going to say, I would request
That way
that you do it since you've got
the end of January.
some experience and knowledge in that area.
Yeah.
Catherine, can you schedule that in the first couple of weeks of January? That makes sense. Thank you. All right, and then new business, fiscal year 2019 regular meeting calendar.
Motion to approve the 2019 regular meeting calendar as submitted.
Second.
All in favor, please say aye. All right, next is public comment. Here's the very last page. Members of the public, we welcome your comments, your thoughts, considerations. Stand up, say your name. This is your big opportunity.
I'll take it. I'm Brianna Mercer, and as you were discussing just the beginnings of the rebranding, it, as a committee is beginning to be formed, I think it would be interesting to include kind of all the many facets of Chamblee, the Historical Society, the Art Society, maybe Recreation Committee, people representing all the different parts of Chamblee in that process, not just the few people that have expressed interest, because that is representing 30,000 people plus a ton of businesses and business people and a lot of different aspects I think would be appropriate on that kind of thought. So that's all.
Thank you.
So she's on the list for Brandon.
Yes, so nominated, say your first name.
I've got her email.
We know where to find you.
Well, good evening. My name is Jenna Simons. I'm the Vice President of Blackberry Design here in Chamblee, and I was...
She is on the committee.
I have no interest in a personal or company stake in the rebranding. If you can use this, great, but I'm more interested as a resident, as someone who has done this with my hometown. I sat on the chamber, and I don't know if you're familiar with LJ, Georgia, but we went through sort of the downtown redevelopment, how we work that in with the whole Apple Capital thing, how we keep that downtown square. I've been through that, so I know your pain and I sympathize. But I would love to have just some conversation about it, just to kind of help where I can, if I can offer any advice. And obviously I am with a branding company, so this is something I am intimately familiar with. So if there's anything that I can help with, I'd love to. But I love the idea that you're bringing in some municipality experts in that way. I think that's helpful, and if nothing else, just to hear some other voices on it. But I love what you're doing. I'm as a city of Chamblee resident and a worker here, I'm excited to see all the progress you guys are making. I just want to compliment you on the work that you're doing. It's beautiful growth, and I love being a part of it. So thanks so much.
Thank you. Any others? All right, we'll close public comment. We're going to have a brief executive session. Can we have a motion?
Motion to go into executive session for a real estate discussion.
Second.
All in favor, please say aye. Aye. And we'll go to executive session. Thank you, everybody, for coming. Executive session. Do we have a motion to adjourn the meeting?
Motion to adjourn.
Do we have a second?
Second.
All in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Thank you, meeting adjourned.